are done with the introductions, and
Yes,
we'll
yes.
just start with the
Yeah,
first
please
slide
start.
right away.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, what is corneal ectasia? So corneal ectasia is basically the cornea, which should be a perfect, nice spherical part of a sphere refracting surface, becomes abnormal. And you can see this picture over here. You can see my mouse pointer. There is, this abnormal thinning which can be seen, and it's protruded over here. So this basically is corneal ectasia, wherein the shape of your cornea is abnormal. The most common entity is keratoconus, and then we'll just touch upon these three: keratoglobus, PMD, that is pellucid marginal degeneration, and Terrien's marginal degeneration, just so that you know that there are other entities also. And the last, which is post LASIK ectasia, which is the most dreaded complication that a LASIK surgeon can imagine. You don't want your LASIK surgeon calling you after a year and telling you, doctor, I think I see less. And that can be a very bad thing for your career also. Now, let's start with keratoconus, and I've given an outline here. Now, this outline is something that you can take to answer any question in any like ophthalmology exam, your short note or a long answer question. So let's just touch upon this for a minute. Just keep this, you can take a screenshot of this, keep this thing in your mind, and any question you just answer according to this. So definition, or what exactly is this disease? Then the second is pathology, wherein you can say about the histopathology, or why this thing has happened, the pathogenesis and the pathophysiology, that is because something has happened, how it is affecting our body. Then the clinical features, which is divided into symptoms and signs. Then the investigations and the management. In terms of management in ophthalmology, you can divide it into uh, for vision, how are you going to help the patient? And second is for the disease, how you're going to help the patient. So for vision, in terms of when you have a cornea based question, you can talk about spectacles, contact lenses. If you have a retina based question, you can talk about spectacles, or if the vision is lesser, you can mention about low visual aids. And in terms of management, you start with just observing, or lasers, injections, or surgery. So let's start with keratoconus. So keratoconus, by the standard definition, which has been going on for years, is a non-inflammatory corneal ectasia, that is corneal protrusion, which is clearly evident in this picture. And it's progressive, that is, it has a potential to keep on increasing. There's thinning, which is seen in the corneal cross section here, and there is protrusion. These things cause irregular astigmatism, and hence the patient has decreased vision. Now, the etiology per se is unknown. There's no hereditary pattern, though positive family histories have been reported. Down syndrome is a common thing which is associated. You can also have Leber's congenital amaurosis, Ehlers-Danlos, and connective tissue disorders. Again, these you can remember because it's a disorder of the collagen. So any other collagen vascular disorder in the body, you could have a relation with keratoconus. There are other risk factors like eye rubbing, atopy, sleep apnea, and floppy eyelid syndrome. So in terms of the pathology, when you have an abnormal keratoconic cornea, you can see that the stroma here is thinned if you look at the arrow. Then if you look at the epithelium, there may be iron deposits in the epithelial layer. These clinically are seen like Fleischer's ring when we come to the signs. There's also, these are the specific words when you describe the pathology of keratoconus. Very, very simple. Just say, Bowman's membrane is disrupted. There is disrupted basement membrane of the epithelium. There's fibrous tissue between basement membrane and Bowman's membrane. And you can also see the Descemet's membrane being disrupted and folded, which clinically presents as hydrops, or sudden decrease of vision and swelling of the cornea. So why is keratoconus important? Now, a normal refracting surface of the cornea would have rays of light come in and they form a point image on the retina. If the cornea is protruded abnormally, you are going to have rays of light which will be less deviated, and in other places there will be rays of light which are more deviated. The result is you have an image of the retina which is on the retina, which is not a point image, but it forms a blurred image, and hence the patient has decreased vision. So you would have a young adult, the mean age of onset being 6 years to about 16 years, but you can have it as young as 6 years, and it can present even later at more than 30 years. They may always look for history of eye rubbing or allergy, or they may be just referred from the optical shop that the patient is not improving with glasses up to 66. Now, okay. So in terms of symptoms, the patient will give history of decreased vision for distance and near. There may be monoocular or binocular diplopia. There may be history of repeated change of glasses power. There may be asthenopia, or a patient may come to your OPD with spectacles and say, I want to get LASIK done, and you incidentally detect keratoconus when you do the scans. Now, signs are very, very obvious if you have moderate, severe, or advanced disease. But it's challenging in the early and the mild cases to pick it up, and that's when it becomes very important. The disease classically is bilateral, that is, it's present in both the eyes, and asymmetrical, that is, one eye is more severe than the other. Now, you can take a screenshot of this slide. So you have these in the signs all written in one place, and this could be a useful thing for last minute revision. So classically, let's start. Patient has these symptoms. The patient comes to you. You start with the examination. Now, in distant direct ophthalmoscopy, you can see this oil droplet sign, which is, you can see a dark reflex in the area of cone. Then you can also see scissoring reflex, wherein the retinoscopy reflex does not move very regularly. The other signs, when you sit and do refraction for the patient, you will see that with spectacles, they don't improve up to 6/6. The patient may have high astigmatism. The myopia may have increased from the last visit or from their present glass prescription. The cylinder power may have increased, or the cylinder may be irregular. When you see the patient on slit lamp, you will see when you make a slit beam, you will see that there is thinning here, and here the cornea is pretty much of normal thickness. And then there is also protrusion of this cornea. You may be able to make out that it is a nipple shaped cone that is small and steep curvature, or it is a larger ellipsoidal cone known as an oval cone, or a very large cone that is the globus cone. You could also see Vogt striae, which are basically vertical striae seen on the cornea, and on pressure on the globe they disappear, and when you release the pressure they reappear. There may be prominent corneal nerves which you could pick up. Now, classical sign that we had spoken about was the Fleischer's ring, wherein on the cobalt blue light you can see this band over here. So this is basically iron deposition in the epithelial layer. Now, in very advanced cases, you can make out Munson's sign, which is basically when you tell the patient to look in down gaze, there will be bulging of the lower lids. Also, you can see scarring at various levels in the cornea, like in this patient. And then we spoke about hydrops, wherein the patient has a sudden rupture in the Descemet's membrane. The cornea becomes abnormally swollen, and the patient will have acute decreased vision, and they'll come to you in the OPD. So in terms of the investigations, okay, the classical one which was described is the Placido disc. So this was used years back, and there are concentric light and dark rings, and then there's this central aperture. So you see the image of this Placido disc on the patient's cornea. Now this is the normal cornea, and you can see the rings are quite regular. In astigmatism, the cornea, the rings will be pulled in one direction, And in keratoconus, you can see that there is this abnormal shape of the rings which is seen. So that's how people picked up keratoconus in the earliest days. Now we have corneal topography and tomography. So they scan the surface of the cornea and they make a 3D map. Now in the 3D map, the areas which are higher or elevated or more curved would be seen as warmer colors like red or purple, while the areas which are have a lesser curvature or say lesser thickness are seen as cool colors, that is green or blue. Now look at this normal map. When you see topography, the first one is the normal map, and in the second and third one you can make out these abnormal red areas. So these are the pictures of keratoconus. The first one has a central cone, while the second one has an inferior cone. The last picture is of another corneal ectasia, which is a pellucid marginal degeneration, and it shows this classical claw appearance on the topography map. So when you get the report in front of you, you get something which is known as the quad map. So this quad map has this curvature, it has the front elevation, the back elevation, and the corneal thickness. Now, this is classically something which will come to you in your OPD. This kind of map is something that the patient will bring to you in the OPD, or if you have a topography, you will get this kind of printout. So you look at the map. First, look at the elevation map. Okay. Now, you can make out that it forms this kind of bow tie pattern. If you have to represent this schematically, you can see that there have been various patterns which are described. So look at this. If you can see my marker, this is a bow tie, okay, which is symmetrical. Symmetrical meaning both the sides are of almost the same size. While this one has a asymmetric bow tie, wherein the lower part is bigger, that is, there is inferior steepening, and the upper part is smaller. Now, the first one again, it has a skewed radial axis. That is, the axis is not 180 between the two ends of the bow tie. So, keratoconus classically is described as asymmetric bow tie. You can make out over here asymmetric bow tie with skewed radial axis. That the radial axis are not at 180. You also look at the pachymetry map. So now this is the curvature. You can see that there is an protrusion here. And then when you look at the pachymetry, you can see that here the pachymetry is 421. That is, there is thinning over here, and it corresponds to the elevation or the increased curvature. That is 54 diopters is kind of, almost at a similar location as the thinnest point. So pachymetry on the quad map will show that there is thinning which is there. Now, when you have something like Pentacam machine with you, you will, and this Pentacam is pretty much the commonest machine which is available worldwide for pre-LASIK screening. You will also get this map which is known as Bellin-Ambrosia Enhanced Ectasia Display. So these have, again, you can see purple areas and red areas, which kind of denote that the elevations and the protrusions are abnormal. The important thing to look over here is this, the last 5 parameters and the total parameter, which is marked as green, yellow, and red. So basically, if you see yellow, that means the whole topography of the patient is borderline, while if it's red, you know that it is abnormal. So you also have to look at these, this maps, and these are made with years of experience, wherein there are complex mathematical software, and they have devised use numbers and come to certain numbers which are considered normal. And if the patient's topography does not fit into them, then it tells you it's abnormal, whether it's borderline. So this again is very important for pre-LASIK screening. The other investigation which is in vogue right now is the anterior segment OCT. So per se, it doesn't help you to diagnose keratoconus as much, but it's very important when you plan surgery like a keratoplasty. Now, this patient, you can see that there is a break in the Descemet's membrane, and hence, if you try to do a deep anterior lamellar keratoplasty, which is the standard of care, you will find it to be nearly impossible. While in this case, the last one, the Descemet's membrane is kind of, quite uniform, and there are no disruptions. So, a DALC may be possible over here. So, preoperative planning. Now, the very important thing, and something which is being researched about a lot, is the epithelial map thickness, wherein you would use a combination of the topography images, and then you would use the anterior segment OCT to map out the epithelial thickness. So this is very important when you're trying to pick up mild cases or very early cases. So if you look at this map, this is a patient wherein the sagittal curvature looks okay. When you look at the back elevation, you see a slight protrusion, and there is slight thinning in the pachymetry map over here. And when you do the epithelial map thickness, you can see that the epithelium is thinned on that area of the potential cone. So that gives you an idea that there's thinning of the epithelium happening here, and you could pick up early cases of keratoconus. Now, classically, once you have these maps in your hand and the tomography images in your hand, the classical Rabinowitz criteria is used for diagnosis. So that is something you should know. It's important to write in your examination and for the viva. Then you have the Amsler-Krumich classification, which helps to stage the keratoconus as stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. So again, these names are important. Please keep those in mind. You may not know the details, but keep the names in mind. The other thing when you look at the map is whether the keratoconus is progressing or not. That means as compared to the previous scans or the previous picture of the patient, whether you're looking at a patient with progressive keratoconus or stable keratoconus. So progression is noted by increased thinning, there's scarring, increased curvature, increased diameter of the cone. Now, let's start with the management. Okay. Like I told you, you have to divide the management into things you do to improve the vision of the patient, and then the other modalities. So in keratoconus also we have strategies to retard the progression, that is to decrease the rate at which it's progressing and to improve vision. And then in very advanced cases, cornea transplant is required. So collagen cross-linking is the classic modality which is used to retard the progression. So on the left side, you can see that before cross-linking, there are bonds between the collagen fibrils in the cornea, and they are lesser. And after collagen cross-linking, these bonds increase. So by so you use riboflavin eye drops and you put it into the cornea. You give it time so that the riboflavin is nicely soaking the cornea. After that, you subject the cornea to ultraviolet radiation. And by that ultraviolet radiation and the riboflavin, there are reactive oxygen species which are formed, which help to form bonds between the collagen fibrils. And by theory, you have a stronger cornea. So this AS-OCT, anterior segment OCT picture shows a nice demarcation line. If you can make out over here, this is the demarcation line. And this anterior part of the cornea is crossed and the posterior part is not cross-linked. And of course, you would not want the UVA radiation to go very posteriorly because there's a risk of damage to the endothelium. Now, post-collagen cross-linking, you can see here that pre-procedure there was a steepening, and post-procedure there is some amount of flattening, that is the protrusion has decreased. So collagen cross-linking also improves the shape, and it is US FDA approved as of 2016. It retards progression. That is, it will not stop the keratoconus from progressing. It will decrease the speed at which it progresses. There may be some flattening of the curvature. Are evaluated every 3 to 6 months to look for progression. spectacles come as management option to improve the vision of the patient. So spectacles are useful in the early cases. Late cases, they will not help you to read 6/6. Contact lenses, in the early cases, you can use soft toric contact lenses, but in the late cases, you will have to use something known as rigid gas permeable contact lenses. So these basically, what they do is the posterior surface of the contact lens is in contact with the cornea, and the tear fluid fills the gap. So essentially, you now have a new refracting surface, that is the anterior surface of the contact lens is the new refracting surface, and thus we have a very regular refracting surface which can actually improve the vision of the patient. So you have this kind of fit which is there for the contact lens, and contact lens fitters do a great job at kind of modulating, and it's like a tailor who would kind of do the fitting of your lens, the comfort of the lens for the patient. So contact lens fitters do an excellent job, and they individualize the contact lens fitting for each patient. So the first picture has a rigid contact lens, which may be 8 to 10 and it's used for the early cases. However, as the severity of keratoconus increases, you may have to go for hybrid contact lenses, which could be a combination of a soft and a hard contact lens. And for the very advanced cases, you have something known as scleral lenses, which could be 14.5 to 16.5 So let's look at some pictures. So this is a Rose K rigid contact lens, and it is a specialized lens for keratoconus. And this is a scleral lens, which is used for the most severe cases. And you can see that this lens is resting on the sclera. Okay, and here there is a fluid reservoir which is there, which is between the posterior surface of the lens and the cornea. So your normal rigid contact lens sits on the cornea, while the scleral lens would sit on the sclera. And then you have this anterior surface of the lens which forms a smooth refracting surface. Then the question comes, but what if the contact lenses don't help to improve the vision? So if the contact lens is not improving, say the patient is contact lens intolerant, the contact lens not sitting on the eye, or the patient is very irritable with the contact lens. So then you see, if the central cornea is clear, then there are two options. You can use Intacs or PRK with C3R. We'll come to those. But if there's central scarring like this, okay, then you will have to go for keratoplasty, DALC or a PK. So let's look at Intacs. So Intacs are basically, you have these segments which are there, okay, which can be put in cases with mild to moderate keratoconus, and they would go into the stroma at about 7 optical zone, and they cause flattening of the corneal surface. So if you look at the dotted line, that's the abnormally protruded cornea, and after the Intacs ring segments have gone in, the shape of the cornea has become flattened. And because our central cornea is clear, this can essentially improve the vision of the patient. So it's helpful to improve the vision. Or if your contact lens was not sitting because it was a very protruded cone, there may be better acceptance of the contact lens. Now the other modality is a PRK with collagen cross. So essentially, don't think the PRK is to correct the entire refractive error. The PRK is only done so that you can remove some part of the cylinder. So in this, you do, if the patient's refraction is say -4 and sphere and -4 cylinder, you do not touch the -4 sphere. You would only target the cylinder, and you do remove that much amount of cylinder. And then over that, you do the collagen cross linking. So what happens is, at the end, the patient probably has better uncorrected visual acuity, or maybe becomes more contact lens tolerant, or with spectacles he is able to improve a little more. So this can be done. Now it can be used for moderate cases, and it stabilizes vision because you're doing a CXL, and it stabilizes the keratoconus also. Now let's come to cases wherein there is okay. So you have to do a cornea transplant. So you can do a penetrating keratoplasty like in this schematic representation when you remove all the layers of the cornea and you transplant another one. Or the recent one is DALK, which is deep anterior lamellar keratoplasty, wherein you only remove tissue up to the Descemet's membrane and you leave the Descemet's membrane and the endothelium intact and you put in a similar tissue from a donor. So penetrating keratoplasty has been going on for years. It's very good, say, after a hydrops wherein the Descemet's membrane is interrupted or if they're full thickness corneal scars. However, because the endothelium is foreign, you can have more graft rejection and more astigmatism has been noted. While DALK is ideal if the endothelium is not scarred and rejection is lesser, globe integrity is better and visual outcome is better. However, surgical skill is much more. So just a representation of the DALK procedure, you require a needle to be put into the stroma, and with that you inject and you create these bubbles which separate the stroma from the overlying anterior stroma, and then you dissect out the tissue. So here in this picture, you can make out that there is air in the anterior chamber and there's a covering of a Descemet's membrane over that. And after that, you take a similar tissue from the donor and you suture it onto the bed. So post DALK again, vision is quite good and rejection rates are much lower. So let's look at some special considerations. So cataract surgery, you may have a patient who comes to OPD who has cataract and you incidentally also detect keratoconus for that. So you would think, okay, a toric IOL, can be put because there's a lot of cylinders, but you have to note that use a toric IOL only if it were a stable cornea with a very well-defined steep meridian. The astigmatism is regular. You can also take history that the patient had history only of glasses used. There was no need of rigid contact lens. That tells you that, okay, the patient had, more of regular and less of irregular astigmatism. And you have to remember, say the patient with glasses improved up to 612 and with the rigid contact lenses improved up to 6.6. Then after your toric IOL insertion, the patient will go only up to 6.6 with 612 with correction. To reach 6.6 again, the patient will require rigid contact lens. That is, the irregular astigmatism component is corrected only by the rigid contact lens. It cannot be corrected by a toric IOL. And toric IOL, it has been reported in literature that it has good results. An important thing is when you go for the IOL power calculation, you use the lowest possible K in the central 3 mm of the optic zone on topography. So what will happen is that you will get a higher IOL power and you're okay. You aim at, low myopia. You don't want to make the patient into a hypero. And if you feel that, the patient does not fall into all of these criteria, just use a monofocal lens and whatever is the residual refractive error can be later corrected by a rigid contact lens. Problems arise in this if you put a toric IOL and there's a lot of irregular astigmatism, then fitting a rigid contact lens becomes very, very difficult. Or if you have a hyperope after cataract surgery, then again the design of the rigid contact lens is difficult. So again, it becomes a very complex situation for the patient. Now, during surgery, it's quite simple. It's quite like your standard procedure, except corneal incisions are possible if it's not an advanced case. The main incision should be at the steep axis, and sealing incisions, if it's difficult, it could be difficult. Just put a suture if you have any doubt. Refractive surprise is something that you have to explain to the patient pre-op, and you have to be ready for IOL exchange or piggyback IOL. And in case the keratoconus progresses later, there is a chance of deterioration of vision. Now, the second special consideration is when you have keratoconus in children. Now, the disease is more aggressive. That's because there are structural differences in the collagen. It's said that with age, there are more crosslinks which are formed in the collagen. So if you have a keratoconus which is detected at say 20, 21, as the age increases, the collagen itself it gets cross-linked, and the chances of keratoconus may become stable. But in children, that'll take time, and often they are associated with a lot of eye rubbing, itching, like atopy, VKC. Children are known to have higher rates of progression. They are higher rates of keratoplasty in children. And it's recommended that if you see a child with keratoconus, then collagen cross-linking has to be done at diagnosis. Now, the efficacy of collagen cross-linking to retard progression is lesser in children than in adults. Okay, so again, most of the things are quite negative for children as compared to adults. If you try to do procedure like Intacs or keratoplasty, again there are poorer outcomes as compared to adults. Also, with the high risk of amblyopia, the visual impairment in a growing and developing child, it affects their social and educational development, and it has a negative impact on the quality of life. So with this, we are done with keratoconus per se. Now let's just have a brief overview of the other ectasias. So this is your classic pellucid marginal corneal degeneration, again progressive, non-inflammatory. Now in this, what happens is there is inferiorly, say from 4 to 8 o'clock position at the limbus, there is thinning, okay, and which can be detected when you put a slit lamp in the scanning slit lamp mode. You can see that there is thinning here, and over the area of thinning you can see a protrusion which is classically seen in this picture. Now it's generally you see 1 mm from the limbus. Note that there is no scarring, no lipid deposition, and no vascularization, which will help you differentiate it from the other ectasia, which is Terrien's marginal degeneration. And if you stain, the overlying epithelium will be intact. In a non-intact epithelium, you will look at something like a peripheral ulcerative keratitis, and the cornea above the thinned area is classically ectatic. So this is the classical, again, clab crop pattern on the topography that is seen. And there's against the rule astigmatism, and the steepening of this inferior cornea. So like we saw in this picture, there is steepening of the inferior cornea. Now let's look at this. If you put the normal topography, the keratoconus topography, and the crab claw pattern of pellucid marginal degeneration. In terms of management, your spectacles, contact lenses, and surgery. Surgery is quite advanced. Your wedge resection, and those are used in very advanced cases. Now, another thing is you have collagen cross-linking. So in PMCD also collagen cross-linking has been reported, and the difference is that you have to do a eccentric radiation in the area of cone. Now the other entity is keratoglobus. Okay, so when you make a slit, you can see that from superior to inferior there is thinning of the entire cornea, and these patients have very poor vision, high myopia, irregular astigmatism. Now, or they can come with a very thin and fragile cornea. So patient comes with corneal perforation in your OPD. Please look at the other eye. See the patient on slit. If you see that there is thinning, you could actually pick up a patient with a keratoglobus, and they have sometimes spontaneous perforations, or minimal trauma to the eye will cause a corneal tear and a perforation. And it's very important when you take the patient to the OT to know that this will be a very challenging surgery to be done. Also, the patient can come with acute eye drops. Now let's look at this keratoglobus patient. You can see that there is protrusion superiorly, inferiorly. And when you look at this pachymetry map, you can see it's 275, 265 in the center as well as periphery, all around. There is corneal thinning. So that's how you pick up a case of keratoglobus. The other ectasia is the Terrien's marginal degeneration, again non-inflammatory, progressive, bilaterally asymmetric. The important thing is there is corneal neovascularization. So if you look in high magnification, you will see that there are thin vessels over here. You can see lipid deposits, and you can see some opacification over here. So on the Topography, again, you see against the rule astigmatism, and there'll be elevation of the front and back surface of the cornea. The last ectasia which is important is your post-LASIK ectasia. Important things to remember here is that the patient comes with increased myopia after LASIK. There may be increased astigmatism from the previous readings. The patient will have loss of uncorrected visual acuity, and even after your spectacle correction that you try, the patient may not reach up to 6.6. On your topography, there will be keratometric steepening and central paracentral thinning and inferior corneal steepening. The important thing is to remember the risk factors as a LASIK surgeon. So there are classical 5 risk factors which are mentioned here, and they form the ectasia risk score system. So there's a tabulation, and you can actually put the risk factors there and tell whether this patient has a low risk or a high risk for post-LASIK ectasia. So if you have an abnormal preoperative topography, like if you have an asymmetric bow tie or skewed radial axis, then if you have a lower residual stromal bed. Now, residual stromal bed is something that we calculate, that is after you make the LASIK flap and after you're done with the ablation, how much is the thickness of the cornea which is left. So if you have a lower thickness of the cornea which is left, then you are at higher risk for ectasia. Younger age again is a higher risk. Lower preoperative corneal thickness. If your corneal thickness was, normal should be around 540, 550, but if you start off in a LASIK patient and their thickest, the thinnest pachymetry was 500, 480, then it becomes a higher risk factor for post-LASIK ectasia. Again, higher myopia will have higher chance of ectasia. Also ask for history of eye rubbing, family history of keratoconus, any refractive instability, or if you get best corrected vision of less than 20/20, then also that patient could be at a higher risk. So to summarize all the ectasias, most of them are non-inflammatory ectatic disorders. Right now, the standard of diagnosing them is to use corneal tomography, which is used for diagnosis and follow-up. Collagen cross-linking is US FDA approved, and it retards the progression. It will not stop the progression. Various rigid contact lenses are available. They are game changers to improve the vision. Personally, most of the cornea specialists would not go in for surgery unless they have done a rigid contact lens trial for the patient. Always do a trial for the patient. Let them see how it feels, how the vision improves. If it improves with rigid contact lens, do not go for a keratoplasty. And advanced cases, which do not improve with rigid contact lens in terms of vision, they require a cornea transplant. So thank you to BOA and thank you to the entire team for having this excellent PG session. And what we'll do right now is we will go to the questions.
Shraddha, that was a nice one, very informative. I think we've covered everything. There are quite a few questions that are coming up. I hope you can see and try and answer them.
Yeah.
So the first question I tried.
So let's go to
that after the age of 30, the keratoconus becomes stable and how it will affect the management.
Right. So keratoconus, like I said, the cross-links between the collagen fibrils are known to increase with age. So as the age increases, there are chances that your keratoconus may become stable because that's what you do in cross-linking. And then what you need to do is always watch for progression. If 6 monthly the keratoconus is not progressing, then you watch the patient 1 yearly. And second thing is you focus on the vision of the patient. So either spectacles or rigid contact lenses. And like I said, every patient, please give a trial of rigid contact lenses. It hardly costs anything to give a trial. And if they're okay, then please do not go for a cornea transplant. And most patients would improve with contact.
What is the role of OK here? The OK lenses, I mean.
Again, ma'am, roll scale lenses again, are a specialty contact lens which are used for keratoconus, and they were used a lot previously. but right now we have a lot of Indian made lenses which are available, and the advantage is that they are more widely available, and they are cost effective as well. So we have a lot of, patients from the lower socioeconomic background who can actually afford the lenses. Of course, Rose K are excellent tried and tested lenses, but these Indian lenses have changed the game, and we are able to reach out to more number of people.
Who's marketing it, and what are the parameters that they need for us to order if we need to?
Right. So, ma'am, you have a lot of Indian companies. I don't want to take the names here, but per se, if you have a good topography with you, then you actually have a contact lens practitioner who can come, who puts in the lens based on the topography which is there. When you look at the patient, you look at how the lens is fitting. If the lens is moving a lot, or if it's too tight, then you change those parameters, and then you over refract. Once you have the fitting in place, you over refract, and that's how you decide the power of the lens, and that way the order is placed to the central person.
Cost of those lenses?
So it depends. If you have a rigid contact lens, yeah, so a rigid
Give us
contact
range of
can be based on the oxygen permeability and the material. It can come as low as 2,000 cost price to the patient, and if you go for a scleral lens, they can come about 10 to 12,000 to 15,000. Now in this, the Boston scleral contact lenses, which were classically from the Boston Eye and Ear Infirmary, they were the first ones and the most common ones which were used. They come to about 50,000 for a pair. So they were kind of affordable only to some people who were able to travel in India.
We move on to the next one then, yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing is, they've asked Intacs versus collagen cross-linking. Now, important thing is to remember, when you remember from the presentation, the first thing is you have to tackle is to retard the progression. And for that, the only treatment available is collagen cross-linking. So you have to look at that. The second thing, Intacs is for improving vision. Okay. So if you have a patient who is non-contact lens tolerant, or who's not happy with the contact lens, will not wear the contact lens, and you have enough place in the cornea, if the cornea is not too thinned, you can try Intacs for the patient to improve the vision.
There's a question saying precautions. Keratoconus. Precautions in cataract surgery with keratoconus. Shraddha?
I think some internet lag is there.
You want to answer that, Sumit?
Yes, so in keratoconus, cataract surgery is something that we face on daily basis. What happens is, the most important thing is the...
Sorry, lost.
Shraddha, there was a question.
No, go on.
So the most important is measuring your IOL power in such cases, because your cornea is quite a steep, and then you also need to correct the astigmatism in such cases. So there are multiple options that you should keep in your mind when you're planning a cataract surgery. Firstly, very important, other than your normal biometry that you do, you should do a topography, see the central 3 millimeter of the cornea, and see how regular it is. If it is very steep and the astigmatism and the axis is changing too much in the central 3 millimeter of the cornea, then again it is difficult for such a patient to get corrected with the toric IOLs or the...
Correct.
Yeah, so in such cases you need to counsel the patient that the dioptric power can be corrected with the normal spherical lens, and for the cylindrical power they might need contact lenses later. In cases if the central cornea is good enough and it is very well distributed, the astigmatism in the central cornea, you can plan a toric IOL in such cases. Secondly, of course, you should see for any other reason for the cataract development in such cases. Like many of the cases are already cross-linked and then they are stable coming to us. So you need to know what is the endothelial count in such cases, because we never know that have they damaged any endothelial cells during the cross-linking. So doing a specular in specially thin cornea less than 400 is very important when you plan a cataract surgery in cases of keratoconus.
So primarily we need to do a specular as well when you're doing the before you do a cataract surgery in keratoconus. That's the takeaway message.
Take home message. Yeah. So can we take this one question? What to write if a short note on
Yes.
PMCD
Please,
or variance is asked? So that is important for the PG students. Now, if you remember that one outline I told you, any question anywhere in ophthalmo, any subject, definition, okay? So if you can see the presentation again, the definitions are there on both the slides. That is, you can write on your own: non-progressive, progressive, slowly progressive, non-inflammatory ectatic disorder of the cornea. And then PMCD and Terriens, you have to remember that where is the thinning? It's near the limbus in both the cases, and then there is protrusion adjacent to the thinning. And in PMCD, there will be no vascularization, opacification, and lipid deposits, while in Terriens there would be. So write the definition. In your pathology, if you don't remember anything, just write there is abnormal collagen, but the exact etiology is not known. Then in terms of the diagnosis, you can write about the topography. Just remember very short things about the topography. Also, I forgot that in the symptoms it's very easy to, no, you don't have to do anything. Just write decreased vision. Patient may come with a spontaneous perforation sometimes, or repeated change of glasses. Again, the same things for keratoconus you can translate to your PMCD or Terriens answer. Management, again, you write about collagen cross-linking in PMCD. It's not so much used in Terriens marginal degeneration. And then you write about improving vision, and you can elaborate a little bit on your contact lenses which are used. So,
you can have a table, sorry to interrupt, you can just write a table wherein you can highlight the things, how different they are.
Different there.
But you know a knowledge of both, and that's how you would distinguish when you see it clinically as well. So that just is more point when we're correcting on that.
Right.
So, there's one question, Shraddha, that's about how is the globus type of keratoconus different to the keratoglobus?
So globus will have a cone, and when you see the pachymetry map, you will see that the peripheral cornea is has a normal thickness, say 400 to 550, 500, 550, 600. That's a globus type of cone. And let me just share the screen, if I can, of the keratoglobus topography that I had. One second. Now, screen share. Okay. Okay, I'm not able to share the screen. Share screen, right. Yeah. So if you look at the pachymetry over here, which I'm pointing to, it is 275 in the center, and all around in the periphery, it's 250, 300. So in keratoglobus, right up to the periphery, to the limbus, and most patients of keratoglobus have extends into the scleral area as well. If you see a patient, you can actually have blue sclera, which is there in these patients. So actually, these maps are also difficult to take in these patients, but per se, important thing to remember is the peripheral cornea will have normal thickness in your keratoglobus type of cone. Let's stop the share.
Any more questions coming in? I think they can ask.
Right. So posterior keratoconus is something which is asked, and which is generally an abnormal protrusion which you see on the topography map on the tomography map on the posterior elevation part, and it's generally non-progressive. It may have some corneal opacification, and it's important in children because they may have some amblyopia because of this, but it's generally non-progressive. So important to pick this up in your toric IOLs, or a child with some scarring and all. And the other thing, Sumit, you were talking about the IOL power calculation in keratoconus. So it's the opposite thing also. All your toric IOL patients, it's best to do a topography because you don't want to miss a keratoconus there. Yes. Okay, they may be at 50 and they may have undiagnosed keratoconus for years, and on topography you may actually pick these kind of things up. So, ma'am, any questions?
Yeah, but that's all. Like, not everyone can not everyone can afford it. I know we work in a setup where we can't really afford everything there, but yeah, a very
But yeah,
practical point would be when you're looking under the microscope, when you're taking the patient up there, try to look for the visual axis, the central fixation, whether it is, if it's a little off center, you'll be able to know what is the kind of a thing. So if it's doubtful, best postpone, pack off, send to the higher center, KJ has it, and yeah, we can then handle it in a better way. It's better to be well prepared before you touch a patient. So
right.
important to do that.
So there was also a question of LASIK extra. Okay. Now this is quite a controversial topic in most forums. Yeah. So we'll just finish with this LASIK extra, ma'am.
Yes,
we have
yes.
time for that.
Yes, yes.
So LASIK extra is a controversial thing in most cornea specialist forum also. Okay, some people feel that LASIK extra is if you have, say, a abnormal topography and you still patient is insisting, or you want to do a refractive surgery for the patient, you do the LASIK, and when you lift up the flap, you've done your LASIK, you do collagen cross linking there. But some people also feel that if you have an abnormal topography, please don't touch the eye for a refractive procedure. Don't make a flap and do LASIK. So it's a complex and a complicated thing with different opinions of the authorities also in this field. So better not venture into this in your exams. So, ma'am, I think time is up.
Yeah,
and
I think it's summed up well, and we've answered most, I think, all of the questions. Has been very good, very productive. Thanks for your time, Shraddha and Sumit. Very well organized. I hope the students have benefited from it. You want to sum up and wrap up, Sumit?
Shraddha, any take-home thing that you want to say? After that, I will wrap up.
So basically, take-home thing would be that just for all the PG students, just remember the outline in your head. If some question comes in front of you, even if you don't know the answer, just put the outline, and I'm sure you can put decreased vision and management with glasses and contact lens in any cornea question works. So just put those things so that at least you get somewhere through in that
yes,
question.
primarily the complaints and all are mostly the same. It's only when you do your topo and your packet, that's when you actually come to your proper diagnosis. So yes, complaints and everything else would be the same. And even if you don't remember much of it specific, you can just write for everything. For keratoconus we do this. For this we do this.
Yeah.
And you can, you would still get your marks. If you want to go a little higher, yes, you can be more specific, and then you can write it. But the treatment would remain the same. When you're writing an answer, it's easier. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think we should. We are.
So yeah, thank you everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Sumit. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
And we have a next lecture on a day after Thursday, and it will be about phaco-dynamics for the PGs, including both basic and advances. So our all lectures are available on the YouTube channel BOA iTalks Plugged In. You can subscribe and see all the lectures, old and the new ones there. So with your permission, can I end the meeting, ma'am?
Yes, okay. Good night all, and stay safe. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.